want to talk to you about one of the most misunderstood concepts in coaching and personal development space: accountability. Because almost everyone who says they need accountability, and almost every coach who says they provide it, is operating from a definition that doesn't actually work. And I think that misunderstanding is why so many people try accountability coaching and walk away feeling like it didn't help. Here's the definition that most people work from. Accountability means having someone check up on you, send you reminders, ask if you did a thing, celebrate you when you did, and gently nudge you when you didn't. That's not accountability. That's supervision. And supervision is the fundamental problem. It only works when the supervisor is present. The moment the check-in stops, the behavior typically stops, because the behavior was never driven by internal commitment. It was driven by external pressure. And external pressure is a terrible long-term strategy for sustainable change. Here's the definition I actually work from. Accountability is the gap between what you said you'd do and what you actually did, and then having the willingness to look at that gap honestly without making any excuses. Notice what's missing from that definition: a supervisor, a checklist, sending someone reminders. Real accountability is internal. It's a relationship you have with yourself, and a standard you should hold yourself to, a commitment you take seriously, and honestly, a practice that doesn't allow you to hide behind justifications. A coach doesn't give you that. A coach creates the conditions where you develop it yourself. So let me show you what that actually looks like in practice. So when a client comes to a session and they didn't follow through on something that we agreed on, the conversation doesn't start with, did you do it? It starts with, what got in the way? And then, what does that tell us? Because here's what I've learned working with people on behavior change. The pattern stops when someone is incredibly consistent and incredibly revealing. It's always the same obstacle presenting itself in different disguises. Sometimes it's time management, but when you dig deeper, it's actually priority conflict. They say this matters, but their schedule says something else matters more. Sometimes it's motivation. When you dig deeper, it's actually identity conflict. They're trying to act like a person they haven't fully decided to be yet. And sometimes it's circumstances. But when you dig deeper, it's actually fear. Fear of what happens if they actually succeed and then have to maintain it. That gap between what they say they want to do and what they did is the window into what's actually going on. And that's where the real coaching works. Here's the other thing most accountability coaching gets wrong. It makes the coach the source of accountability, which means the client becomes dependent on the coach to maintain behavior. That's backwards. The goal of accountability coaching, if done right, is to make itself unnecessary. We're not building a habit of checking in with me. We're building the version of you that holds yourself to a standard because of that standard being part of your identity. When identity is the foundation, you don't need someone checking up on you. You need someone helping you build those internal architectures that I've talked about before that make external accountability irrelevant. It's a completely different thing and produces completely different results. And so here's what that looks like in my coaching practice specifically. Every engagement starts with establishing what accountability actually means for that person, not what it generically means. What standard do they want to hold themselves to? What does following through look like in their specific life? And what has that historically gotten in the way? Then we build structure around that, not a check-in schedule, an architecture, systems that make the right behavior the default, environments that reduce friction, commitments that are specific enough to be measurable and honest enough to be real. And when something doesn't happen, and something always doesn't happen at some point, we don't skip the past it. We sit with the gap and we ask, what is it telling us? Because that gap is the data. And data is what we're going to build real solutions from. So if you've tried accountability coaching before and it felt like supervision, like someone was babysitting you rather than building something with you, I understand why it didn't work. That's not what accountability actually is. If you want to understand what it looks like to develop that internal mechanism that makes external accountability unnecessary, the link is in the description. A free 30-minute discovery call, real conversations, no pitch. I'm Jeff. This is Becoming Lighter in Life and Mind. Subscribe if this is useful, and there's more coming.